welcome to what is the hottest ticket in town on International Women's Day. We've got a queue going down the road for miles, and we are in this place to celebrate International Women's Day and the work of the Queen's Commonwealth Trust and its extraordinary partners. So I have the privilege and the joy and the fun of being the Chief Executive of the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. And you might have noticed a bit of branding around the place because we're so proud of this brand and this work and the work that young people are doing. So thank you for coming today to share this really exciting moment with us, with the panel of a lifetime. I think everyone will agree.
Next to Adwa, who will not be known as Barbie for the rest of this session, is Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, who started her feminist journey at the age of 11, complaining about the portrayal of women in advertising. In her present role, she's been a vociferous spokeswoman, a royal not afraid to embrace full-on feminism, and, as of today, Vice President of the QCT. Good morning, Royal Highness. Just a quick one as we're among friends. I mean, how's that bump treating you?
Very well. It's funny, I've actually been joking in the past few weeks. I'd seen this documentary on Netflix about feminism, and one of the things they said during pregnancy was, I feel the embryonic kicking of feminism. I love that. So boy or girl, whatever it is, we hope that that's the case with our little
The next generation of feminism is already on the way there. Guaranteed. You heard it here first. When ideas are planted. So, come to you, Your Royal Highness. You've been out there as a feminist since the age of 11, possibly earlier, if so I missed that story. But to give us an insight to your personal journey and what made you decide that this is the thing you want to engage in most of all, and what you want to do with it now, with the role that you have.
Yes, of course. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. At the age of 11, I had seen a commercial at the time that I found to be very sexist. And, truth be told, at 11, I don't even think I really knew what sexism meant. I just knew that something struck me internally. No one was telling me that it was wrong, but I knew that it was wrong. And I think sort of using that as my moral compass and moving through from the age of 11, being able to see that at that age, I was able to actually change this commercial before social media, before being able to have a larger reach, just putting pen to paper, it really set up the trajectory for me to say, if things are wrong and there is a lack of justice and there's an inequality, then someone needs to say something. And why not me? So I think, if I look at that from that young age and then sort of follow what I did in the years after that, it was always about learning more, not just from where I was, but where else in the world similar things were happening, a different version of the same thing, so to speak. And once I became old enough to travel, specifically to developing countries, and see what was happening abroad, I think for me what really resonated was the lack of education for girls and how that has a ripple effect on so many things. And I think, it seems like a broad stroke, and many people will say, okay, fine, yes, you want girls to have an education, you just want to have smart girls. It's actually much more complex than that, and it really does solve so many of the world's problems when a girl has access to education. You look at it and you could say, here are the vulnerabilities and the challenges that come about when they don't have access to education, right? Early childhood marriage, susceptibility to trafficking, modern slavery, all of that. But equally, look at all of the positives that come out of it when you do have access to education for young girls, how it affects economic development, the GDP, billions of dollars on the table are lost by girls being pulled out of education. And so I think when I look at it from those terms, it would be impossible for me to sit back and not do something about it. And I think, looking at my role that I'm very, very privileged to have now with the QCT, just expands that platform to be able to go to 53 Commonwealth countries and do this level of work all across the globe, because again, it is about global feminism. It is about a parity and equality for all of us. And so, yeah, it started at 11, but it still feels like it's just the beginning. So it's very exciting. Thank you.
I don't get the feeling you're going to let that one go easily, but do we need to just be sure, just a short answer? Do you think we need to be better about selling this to men and boys? Do we get a bit trapped in sort of almost behaving as if it's only a subject for women? What do we need to just do differently there?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think, it's interesting because they're not separate conversations. And I think the idea of feminism and whatever stigmatization is surrounded just in that word in and of itself, to Annie's point, making it global feminism changes that conversation immediately. But for men to understand they can be feminists as well. I mean, I think when we talk about gender stereotypes shifting, what it means to be masculine, what it means to be feminine. You know, I've said for a long time, you can be feminine and a feminist. You can be masculine, and I think in terms of masculinity, you understand that your strength includes knowing your vulnerabilities, and your sense of self and security, your confidence, comes in knowing that a woman by your side, not behind you, is actually something that you shouldn't be threatened about, but as opposed to that, you should feel really empowered in having that additional support, that this is really about us working together. That's what gender equality means for me, and having men part of that conversation to say, there's nothing threatening about a woman coming up to the same level. It's our safety in numbers. This is our power and our strength as a team. So, and that's gender neutral, if you really think about it. So I hope that men are part of the conversation. My husband certainly is.
Yeah, don't let him off. What's experiences just...
We can all sort of probably speak to this in some regard, but I think, you know, in developing countries as well, and this is where I had done some work in India a few years ago with this great organization called Minna Mahila, small grassroots, working in slum communities, trying to destigmatize what menstruation means for a lot of these young girls and women, but also giving them the access to be able to get the products, but in the same construct, having these women sort of mobilize to be able to set up microfinance, to sell these pads and other things that are needed to other women within the community. So again, it feels like it's one issue, but it ends up solving so many, because when you see how many girls are hindered and taken out of school simply because they're ashamed of going through that transition in their life, or because no one wants to talk about it, or because they don't have what they need and they're using old rags, literally, right? Which then, of course, is propelling disease and so many other symptoms that come from this. I think at the end of the day, if we are doing our part to just normalize the conversation, that's the first step, because again, this is 50% of the population that's affected by something that can also end up creating the most beautiful thing in the world. Yeah. So it's sort of a strange one that it's ended up become so stigmatized, but I think to remember that it's also in our own communities that that's happening. The only way we shift that is by really talking about it, which is why the work you're doing with Girls Talk is so important.
I know, Mum, that you've discussed this often with your own background in mind, your own mixed race heritage, and that you once had difficulty when you were presented with a census and felt that the boxes just didn't make sense to you. Now that, of course, you have that experience in America, you now have your time here in the UK, do you think that women of colour face particular hurdles? And UK or America, are they very similar or are they rather different?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think, again, going back to the idea of how this is global, it's that we're all experiencing, in some ways, a different version of the same thing. So in many cases, that can be colorblind, and you are marginalized simply by being a woman. In other cases, there's an added layer of race, social demographic. I mean, there's so many key elements at play there. And I think at the end of the day, what is equalizing for all of us is to understand that just as women, full stop, as you say here, I would say period, but it would be nuanced in the context of this panel.
You read my mind.
Yes, exactly. But I think at the end of the day, as women, you know, and as people, bringing men back into that conversation, that it really is about the injustices that we are all experiencing on so many different levels, and to be able to say, as a united force, how are we going to tackle those? Oh, that's okay. How are we going to tackle those? And so I think, you know, again, you can focus on the specificity of it, but at the end of the day, it is a global problem that we are all dealing with, and that at the same time, you can see it as a global challenge that we are all working to solve.
Great, thank you. Must move on, but the Duchess, there's still... The reason that I sort of cite the discomfort is that if you look at the reaction to someone in a position like your own mum, who goes out there and actually just uses the feminism word very naturally in conversation, you can sometimes find yourself with headlines saying, it's all gone a bit trendy, it's gone a bit woke, and not in a good way. What's your response to that? Is it water off a duck's back, or does it arise sensitivity within
No,
you?
no, I mean, well, what's that?
You don't read them.
That's exactly, Adra knows. I don't read anything. It's much safer that way. But equally, that's just my own personal preference, because I think positive or negative, it can all sort of just feel like noise to a certain extent these days. And so as opposed to getting muddled with that to focus on the real cause. So for me, I think the idea of making the word feminism trendy, that doesn't make any sense to me personally, right? This is something that is going to be part of the conversation forever. And I think the more that we normalize it, you see that to the point of how men and boys should be part of the conversation, specifically in developing countries. I think it would be impossible to not have boys, especially as part of this conversation, because picture how much courage it takes for a young girl in a small village where most of the girls haven't gone to school, and they are reaching out and doing whatever they can, walking miles to be able to get an education. Now, if they go home and they are feeling marginalized by their younger brothers, older brothers, that their fathers, given the cultural context of where this may be, has a sense of his daughter's place in that home, then nothing's really shifting, because there might be one day where she goes, you know what, I won't go to school. But if you have young boys as part of this conversation as well, you're moving the needle in a different way, because they're not mimicking learned behavior that could be incredibly sabotaging for a young girl's potential. Because again, I think this is part of the education piece, not just for girls, but for boys and men to understand what we're talking about when we talk about feminism. Again, it's not just about girls going to school and becoming smart girls. It's knowing that those smart girls become influential women, and that ends up changing the world for the better.
So, Your Royal Highness, what's blocking progress for women and equality in today's world? Don't hold back.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, you don't say. No, I mean, look, I think we've covered how important education is. That we know. That is one huge thing. The lack of access to education is, in my mind, the single largest hindrance to this equality that we are all seeking out. But then to your point of saying things like, which I wouldn't have known, the idea that there's a headline saying feminism is a trendy word. That's not helpful either, right? So, I mean, I think when you look at all the different layers of the hindrances that are coming in, it starts on a really large level, the actual access that we're talking to, but also what that conversation is. We have a responsibility as well, that if we're part of social media, if we're engaging in that way, that we are not just giving people more things to chat about, but actually something to do. Exactly. And that's why I say, what's the call to action? A hashtag is not enough, right? So you say, great, you can make a donation. You could sponsor a girl, with Minima Healer, through Queen's Commonwealth Trust, through so many of these organizations, with CAMA, CAMFED, to be able to say, this is a tangible thing that I can do that will enable this girl to stay in school for a year. That's something you can do. And I think oftentimes when we talk about themes like this that are so large, people just don't know where to begin. So give them something to do. Say, this will cost you so little and it will make the largest impact. But that is how we start to affect that change, because it's action. Yeah.
Connie's very good point. We haven't got time to dwell on it a lot. Just one thought, perhaps, again from you, ma'am, and then the rest of the panelists. Technology is a bit of a frenemy on this one. I was thinking, I cover politics a lot in the rest of my life, and we've seen a lot of female MPs, but I think those women in public life generally coming out talking about the just extraordinary amounts of abuse and vile bile that they get through social media. I mean, do you think we need to just be much more active about this? And what should we do?
The role in that in regards
of social media, and basically the fact that we are, a lot of women who are prepared to step into leadership positions, and Chris Ann will be a new generation of that, are facing that sort of thing. Yeah. Big questions there for tech companies, big questions for all of us.
No, of course. Look, I think, again, it's our responsibility. We make a choice in what we click on, we make a choice in what we read, we make a choice in what we engage in. That is our personal decision, to not feed into negativity, right? To really sort of be more cause-driven and action-based. And, for me, it's a tricky one, because I'm not part of any of that. And again, as Adam knows, I don't look at it.
You never look at, say, Twitter?
No. Sorry, no. And for me, that is my personal preference, right? But I do read The Economist, so I'll give you that one. Yes,
been in a job then.
But again, looking at journalism that's really covering things that are going to make the impact, which we talked about backstage. We were talking about the Tanzania, right? The article The Economist just did. So things like that that are really talking about how the role of women is shifting, changing. I think that's key. Focus your energy there and not on the stuff that is perhaps muddling you in other directions.
It is overwhelming, it is overwhelming, but I don't think that should stop us. I heard Michelle Obama last year say an amazing thing. There are so many things that are going on, and we shouldn't we're not necessarily, it'd be great if we were still here to like see all the changes that we're trying to make, but that shouldn't hinder us and stop us from continuing on for the generations after us and the women after us.
Move on our way. So haiku-like last thoughts. Presenters must always chance their arm. Maybe apart from everything good that you're doing here in the public realm, what treat are you going to give yourselves on International Women's Day? Who'd like to have a go at that?
What treat?
You've earned it. A treat. A treat. That's a strange English way of saying, are you going to do something nice for yourself on International Women's Day? You know what I mean.
I am celebrating and doing a collaboration with Boiler Room. I don't know. And we are celebrating, we're celebrating musicians. I'm going to be dancing the night away with Georgia Smith and Little Sims and
Oh yeah, we're all up for that.
yeah, lots of women that inspire me.
There's like 200 of our friends. Maybe other end of the panel. Anyone got thoughts?
I'm flying to New York tonight, and I'm certainly going to toss down that glass of champagne before I get on the flight.
Spoken from the heart.
I'm here right now, but also one of the things that you don't get to see that's invisible is that I've got 120,000 Kama sisters just rooting and singing for me. So we're going to have a party. Virtual.
I didn't think that quite far ahead, but I'm actually heading to the South Bank later to be a part of the Women on the Move award ceremony. I'm going to be surrounded by amazing women doing amazing things, so that's my self-care. Self-care
would have been the more appropriate title. Self-care and care for others.
Well, it's very important to have some self-care because actually a lot of people like myself, advocates and activists get burned out. So I say that I'm slightly singed on the edges, but still going strong. I'm off to the WOW Festival after this, which is going to be fantastic. I'm going to be talking with Jude. I'm going to be in conversation with another audience. And I'm just thrilled that today, on International Women's Day, Apple Music have given us the opportunity to create a short film that explains the reasons why global feminism is an absolute must for the future zeitgeist.
Last word, Royal Highness. Self-care, as I now call treating myself. You're still treating yourself to some rather fabulous shoes.
Thank you. I think the treat in and of itself is being able to be here and be with these incredible women on the panel. I mean, that is such a gift on this day. And then separate from that, the women in my life that I want to celebrate, I will continue to send some love to today, but also the men, who are championing all of us as part of this journey is great. And then I'll put my feet up because that's a deserved treat, especially at this stage of pregnancy.
Thank you so much, our fantastic panel, for being so open, so convivial, and taking on some pretty tough questions there, but with great aplomb and goodwill. So and also for you being here, hope you enjoyed our questions and that they roughly answered what you're thinking about, notwithstanding the fact that we might not be read by the Duchess. Let's keep sort of tweeting and communicating about this in the bits of social media that are not horrific. And we could just ask you politely, if you could just remain in your seats just while the panel departs, on the excuse that we have a very, very pregnant honoured guest to somehow get off a narrow platform and out around the room with the rest of us. Thank you so much for coming along today.
Thank you, everyone.